Okay. Welcome everyone. Really good to see you all here today. So my name's Tazy. I'm from the COVID Action Campaign. And so I'm just going to run through the schedule for the day and then give a bit of introduction. So starting now, and we'll start with four short sort of talks from Joan and then Janet, and then I'll be reading out a speech from Alena from Global Justice Now, and then we'll go over to Stephen. And then after that, there'll be opportunities to ask questions to the speakers and have some discussion. Then we'll have a 10-minute break at 4:15. And then after the break, we will move on to workshops. And the workshops, there will be three different ones to choose from. One will be on organizing in our workplaces through our unions. One will be on sort of building community and how we can organize in our communities. And one will be focusing on actions we can take sort of out in public, out on the street. And then after the workshops are over at 5 p.m, we'll just all come back together and have a chance to kind of feedback to each other about how we want to take those discussions forward and what we've come up with. So the reason that we're having this meeting today is because Zero COVID has changed its name now to COVID Action. And that was for several reasons. The main ones being basically that we want our campaign to kind of broaden out and focus on more different like aspects of the COVID crisis, and kind of also recognizing that the terrain has changed a lot and we need to be responding to those new circumstances. So the Tories' push to kind of normalize high infection rates has been at this point almost completely successful. And people now just expect to get COVID repeatedly, and that has been completely normalized. During the Tory leadership contest, we saw the two candidates vying to beat each other in how kind of regressive they could be on COVID. Sunak was saying that he was always against all the lockdowns, which was true, and his interventions meant that one lockdown was actually delayed. And Truss has pledged that there will never be another lockdown in this country, come what may, like anything that she would never consider that, no matter the circumstances. And also at the same time, completely talking about it as yesterday's issue and not something that is an ongoing issue. And then the other thing I think that has changed is obviously because COVID has been pushed out of the public discussion so much. And that is partly because there's a new crisis on the horizon, which is the cost of living crisis. Not on the horizon, it's here. It's a very pressing issue. But again, we see this thing of it being completely separated off from the pandemic, despite the fact that they are related in so many ways. So we know that worker shortages and disruption in supply chains due to COVID are part of the pressure that is causing the cost of living crisis. It's a small part of it, but it is part of it, and that's backed up by the Bank of England and so on. And on the other side, the cost of living crisis obviously is going to worsen the COVID pandemic and worsen it as a crisis of inequality, where people cannot afford tests, cannot afford to take time off work when they're sick, and struggle more to self-isolate. So our new name is trying to adapt to those circumstances and focus on what we can be doing together, how we can intervene. We are going to take action, and we want to see action from the government and from other decision makers like our employers and so on. So it's really about kind of, we've got currently the situation where it's been completely erased and we want to break that silence. Obviously today also we've gone ahead with this meeting in the context where a lot of things are being cancelled in respect to the Queen dying. I don't actually have anything to say to that. I don't know why I mentioned that. Let's cut that out of the recording. We're going ahead with the meeting. Thank you all for being here. Without further ado, I'd like to bring in, and just quickly on Zoom tech, the live transcript is on at the bottom, so you can see that along the bottom. If you find that distracting, you can just switch it off by clicking the live transcript button. The chat is on, but we ask that people don't have completely parallel conversations in the chat because it can be quite distracting. And then later when we come on to questions, we'll be using the raise hand function, which you can find under reactions and then raise hand. And I think that's everything. If you have any questions, just drop it in the chat. So our first speaker is Joan, who is a member of the COVID Action Steering Committee. So Joan, over to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Daisy. This snazzy background isn't a Zoom background. I am actually in hospital and have been for the last week. And I'm not in hospital with COVID. I've managed to avoid it so far. I have had, for many decades, chronic Crohn's disease, and it was having a flare up, and I'm going home tonight, so don't worry about me. But what I did want to start by talking about was the experience I've had in the last week, because I think it's been quite interesting. I know I'm in an ultra privileged position because my local hospital is Guy's and St Thomas's in central London, which is also the local hospital of MPs and royalty and everybody else. However, my experience was actually it is actually a local hospital. The majority of people in here are local residents and local people, and I've been in here often enough to know that to be the case. I came into A&E quite late on Tuesday night. I did my normal practice, which was to get a taxi because I live nearby. It wasn't that I was avoiding the ambulance service, although that would have been a factor. Mandatory masks instantly before going into A&E. Because I ticked a box that said shielding, without any fuss or any questions, I was put into a section of cubicles, which was a side bit for people shielding. I was then put in to a private room downstairs. Tommy's has this very complicated A&E system. You go through a whole chain of different things. They set this up when you had the 4-hour breach times. So you go to different places for assessment, but all the way through I was put into separate rooms. I'm currently, and have been all week, in a very, very nice private room on the 11th floor of St Thomas's. Very good view, although not over Big Ben, but this time it's the trains, so I can watch the trains. En suite. I don't know why people pay for private treatment. But as I said, a COVID test was done almost immediately as well. So, you know, the precautions and restrictions in this hospital have not been dropped in any shape or form. And I think that's really important. And I also want to say, in terms of the speed of my treatments, and I wasn't somebody having a heart attack or anything else. I was somebody relatively at risk, but I've done this before. I know what the journey's like. I got through the system quicker than I had before. It took me 3 minutes to get triaged, another 10 minutes before I was in a bed having cardiac monitor stuck onto me. And you do have to kind of say, what's crisis in the NHS? Now, I know there is a crisis in the NHS. There is always a crisis in the NHS, and I've experienced it, particularly under Tory governments. There is major crises in parts of the NHS, of the services, in particular, for example, GP appointments, ambulances, and certain treatments where the waiting lists are much longer than they are in others. But I also think that we need to be very, very careful not to fall into a trap when we talk about the NHS and its crisis. We have to walk a tightrope. We have to fight and campaign for those resources, for the additional staffing, which the biggest problem there has been caused by Brexit. And we need to keep saying that, as well as everything else. We need those resources, but the right wing wants us to talk down the NHS. Apparently, the social attitude survey says that between 2021, i.e. the middle of the pandemic, satisfaction with the NHS had fallen by 36% since 2020. And that was at a time when people were going out applauding the NHS workers. And it was then at its lowest level since 1997. And lack of satisfaction plays into Tory hands. They do it with any other service, so why should the NHS be any different? They run them down, people are dissatisfied. For most people, they don't care who provides the service, they just want the service. They don't care if they're getting their cataracts done or their knee fixed by a private company, as long as it gets done. And that is so important that we have to counter that propaganda. And those statistics of the satisfaction levels, I think, show how successful the propaganda has been. We need to, you see regularly stories about how bad the NHS is in the right-wing media. You very rarely see how good it is. And we know that the Tories hate any kind of collective organisation, and their particular targets are always the NHS and the BBC. And they want these organisations to be privatised because making a profit is at their heart of their ideology, and they have tried and you look at the profits that were made during a pandemic, is really, really scary and really horrifying. So we have to make sure that we can find a way that says, yes, campaign for the resources, but people should learn and understand that very, very large parts of the NHS save lives every day and are really, really important and really lovely, and actually look after people really well. So we're, along with the pro-NHS campaigns, and we don't want to supplant them, we do feel that we need to be part of the campaigns for the NHS, because COVID has had an impact on it, and it is still having an impact on the NHS. And as Tazy said, we can't pretend that's gone away. It hasn't. It is still happening, whether it's for people who are sick with COVID, whether it's staff who are off because they're sick with COVID, or whether it's because they've got long COVID, then all those are kind of hitting on the NHS to provide the answers. The only other point I'd like to make is that it's interesting and telling that we decided 2 or 3 months ago that we were going to build up to this launch of changing the name of Zero COVID to COVID Action, but we're now doing it as the nation is changing. We've got one Liz has departed as another has arrived, and it's that Liz that we have to focus on. She's said nothing about COVID. If you Google her name and COVID, the only thing I could find is that she had COVID once and had to cancel a trip somewhere about because of it. She needs the support of those groups like the COVID recovery group, those very right wingers who campaigned against COVID and for a eugenics policy and have even questioned the very existence of COVID or vaccination. She needs their support. And it has become incredibly clear over the 5 weeks of the Tory leadership campaign that she will say anything and do anything to get power. And we thought Boris was bad at U-turns. She's perfected it, hasn't she? She's learned from a master. So if she's going to preside over even more COVID deaths than the 200,000 that Johnson did, then we, and that means the whole of the Labour movement and our allies, we have to do everything we can to demand protections and precautions, because the pandemic is not over, and collectively we have to keep plugging that message until it is. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Joan. So our next speaker is Janet Newsham from the Hazards campaign, and she's going to speak a bit about what the Hazards campaign have been doing on COVID and where things stand with that. Janet, are you able to?
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. And can I first of all say that I'm really pleased to be asked to be part of this launch of the change of name to COVID Action Now. The Hazards campaign has been part of Zero COVID campaign from the beginning. And our strategy is still as relevant today as it's always been. At the beginning, the National Hazards campaign endorsed the call for action to force this government, to force our government to take a zero COVID approach to suppress the virus, to save lives and livelihoods. And we would say nothing's changed. On March the 11th this year, which was the anniversary of when WHO declared COVID a pandemic, we held an event with bereaved families of workers to remember their loved ones, including hearing from a partner and 2 small children of a health worker who died early in the pandemic. It was heartbreaking. We heard them talk about the loss of their dad. In the Hazards movement, we know how important it is to talk about the people behind the statistics. Every year on Workers' Memorial Day, we remember all those workers that have died each year because of work. And we talk about the stories, why they were killed. I want to just read a part of a verse from a poem from Dorothy Duffy, which was written in April 2020 for Rose, her sister. And she says, "My sister is not a statistic. Her underlying conditions were love, kindness, belief in the essential goodness of mankind, uproarious laughter, forgiveness, compassion, a storyteller, a survivor, a comforter, a force of nature, and so much more. My sister is not a statistic." And we know how COVID victims are continuing to be viewed as statistics by this government in an imaginary world free from serious infection, and that we just have to get on with life, as Tansy said, and ignore the peril around us, as they keep saying it's for the sake of our mental health. But our mental health suffers from being surrounded by blind ignorance and ineptitude. Throughout the pandemic, the Hazards campaign has argued that workers' health is public health, and that unsafe workplaces are infecting workers who transmit the virus into their communities to the families and driving up the overall infection rates and putting everyone at risk. But the government, the UK, has an irresponsible and dangerous public health strategy being followed now. And I'll admit that it's better in some parts of the UK than others. But when I say it's a public health strategy, there doesn't seem to be much about public health in the current strategy. When I look back at the last 2.5 years, I would never have thought it possible that the UK government could have followed such a genocidal approach to a dangerous pathogen. They have allowed more than 200,000 people to die in the UK, many in places that should and could have been made safe with proper infection controls. This pandemic was foreseeable. We all know that. Not if it was going to happen, but when. International committees met to plan for such an eventuality. But our government chose not to follow the advice of experts. They didn't prepare for a disaster that was needed. And even when those countries ahead of us in the pandemic timeline shouted warnings and turned on the pandemic sirens, our government ignored the reality, ignored the advice, ignored the experts, and had their eyes fixated on Brexit and the money. Do not forget, their negligence has known no bounds. Their continual pursuit of so-called herd immunity, espoused by the Great Barrington Declaration, has placed many people in peril. They have exposed their citizens to a deadly virus, leaving many infected, reinfected, left with long-term ill health and disability or worse. It is unforgivable. Many people still terrified of infection or reinfection, which limit their lives, unable to leave their homes or socialise because this government fails to control the risks. And the risks are not new. They're manageable and controllable with the right mitigations. Our government didn't just take no action, they actually reduced and downgraded the existing precautions and deliberately, I say, put people's lives at risk with inadequate PPE by not investing in air filtration, by not providing indoor spaces with more space, by not encouraging people into the outdoor spaces, by not doing adequate testing, tracing, isolating, or financially supporting people to stay at home. All indoor spaces should now be controlling the infection risk. They should have before the pandemic, but with the added urgency of COVID, they damn well should be doing it now. In the Hazards campaign, we've been exasperated by the lack of health and safety enforcement, which should have been central to controlling the risks. The COVID Safety Pledge, which I'm proud to be part of, the Scores and the Doors, all great initiatives that could help prevent infections and reduce the transmission of the virus in our communities. And to those most vulnerable, the young, those are the elderly, those who are pregnant or with compromised health conditions. Governments concentrated on opening up the economy by demonising individuals, ignoring the role of the workplace as a source of infection and transmission, and failing to enforce health and safety law that should have ensured employers in every setting were controlling the risks of infection, that were driving up community cases and ignoring the reality of long COVID for all workers, including those in the front line caring for others in health and social care. Our government's failure to protect workers has failed to protect our communities. And this recurrent narrative by politicians and the media that the transmissions of COVID-19 were fueled by misbehaving families and students shirking their responsibilities to our communities. The images of young people in bars, in restaurants, in clubs, in gyms weren't intended to show the absurdity of opening up these venues or the transmission risks of being indoors without adequate ventilation or lack of public awareness of aerosol risks, but to add to the narrative that out of control young people were spreading the virus. All these places, including schools, colleges, universities, sandwich bars, fast food outlets, buses, trains, etc., are workplaces. Workplaces with employers have a legal responsibility to control the virus. And if people who contracted the virus on their premises as part of their work activities and the employer hasn't carried out their duty of controlling the risk, but we all know this government couldn't care less about our families and our friends. They partied, they ignored the laws, and they abandoned all hope of controlling transmission or ensuring that workers and their families were safe in indoor settings. They found the money when they need or want to. They spend it where they want it to be spent on their friends, and they refuse to protect our families and friends. They're cruelly, as Joan said, reducing the resources needed for the NHS for overworked and exhausted workers in all different sectors. They've ransacked the public purse to pursue their neoliberal greedy agenda, expanding their global reach to pick the pockets of exploited workers from outside the UK. The hazards campaign agenda hasn't changed. We know how to prevent infections, and there is robust enough evidence that supports us. Last month, we produced, with the Doctors in Unite, a document to help trade unions holding physical events with how to keep people safe. Our national conference this year in July was held as a hybrid event, and Hilda constantly producing and doing training on ventilation. We not only talk the talk, but we walk the walk. We're all in an extremely perilous situation. New variants are circling us, and with more time being spent indoors, then there is a higher infection risks. We have to fight for safer workplaces, safer indoor spaces, not only for COVID, but for all those other infections. And hybrid meetings and work are good for COVID, and they're good for the climate. We need new builds to be better ventilated, air filtrated, energy efficient, and pollutant and virus free. We need more space where we work, educate, travel, or care. Finally, our Asian colleagues have worn PPE for far longer than COVID to address the airborne pollutants and pathogens they're exposed to. It is utter nonsense to scrap and vilify mask wearers at a time of such airborne disasters. The politicising of public health and the privatisation of health and social care on our service sector is a deadly combination. As many people are dying now as they did in 2020, 2021, our government's response is to lie, is to hide the data and pretend it's all over. It will be for some. And the unknown long-term health impacts are only just becoming evident across everyone in society, including the very young. 10.5 million children globally have been affected by COVID associated with the parental and caregiver deaths. The mental health impact of this is too horrendous to contemplate, but it is also heartbreaking to listen to the voices of children who have had their physical health devastated by COVID infections. As well as our thoughts, they need direct and urgent action to prevent reinfections, support their physical and mental needs, and reduce the infection rates in our communities. We have to continue, and we have to continue strong. And I'm pleased to support today's initiative and the new name launch. Thank you.
Thanks, Janet. Next, unfortunately, our next speaker was supposed to be Alena from Global Justice Now, who have been doing brilliant campaigning on global access to the vaccine. Unfortunately, she couldn't make it at the last minute because she was unwell, but she has sent us a statement that Terry is now going to read for us.
Thanks so much. So imagine I'm Alena. Dear all, thank you for joining this meeting, and apologies I cannot address it in person. Despite what the media landscape and politicians seem to think, the COVID-19 pandemic is not over. What is more, lessons from the past 2 years seem not to have been learnt. We had a historic opportunity to start changing the balance of economic power embedded in the pharmaceutical industry, to start addressing health inequalities and better prepare for future pandemics. Public funding has been central to the UK's creation and rollout of the vaccines and treatments, but could the state do more to make sure medicines are available to all? The COVID-19 response showed the vital role the state plays in innovation, but a privatised response led to deadly global vaccine inequalities and huge strain on public health systems. As part of our campaign at Global Justice Now, we explore the legacy of the pandemic and explore the reforms to domestic and international innovation policies needed to prepare for the future health crises, as well as highlight the ongoing negative impact that COVID-19 has across the world. We address, firstly, the global pandemic inequality. In 2021, the WHO set the target for 70% global vaccination coverage by mid-2022. As of June 2022, only 58 of the WHO's 194 member states had reached that target, and Only in low-income countries, just 37% of healthcare workers had received a complete course of primary vaccination. In June 2022, research by Oxfam and the People's Vaccine Alliance showed less than half, 49%, of the 2.1 billion COVID vaccination doses promised to poorer countries by the G7 have been delivered. The UK was amongst the worst offenders in not fulfilling its promises. A Lancet report found that 600,000 people in low-income countries alone died because vaccine targets weren't reached in 2021. Rich nations may have already secured over half, 55% of the new generation of Omicron-specific mRNA COVID-19 vaccines being developed by Moderna and Pfizer-BioNTech. Patterns of vaccine inequality are replicated at the minute with the monkeypox crisis, with no vaccine so far administered in Africa, despite the continent accounting for almost all recorded monkeypox deaths. The UK's responsibility to people abroad. We need to move away from a model of charity to one of solidarity and justice. UK aid budget cuts is one example of why countries across the world should not be left to rely on donations, but we need to support countries to respond to crises with their own tools. Doing this would prepare the whole world better for the next health crisis. The UK's decision to count donations of leftover COVID-19 vaccines as foreign aid could effectively slash 300 million from this year's aid spending. The need for regional manufacture of medicines. We saw from the process of the TRIPS waiver negotiations that the interests of uncompetitive business monopolies dominate discussions. The UK blocked action for as long as it took to take the pressure off a broken model. Leaving the power to enter into license agreements with different countries and manufacturers entirely in the hands of pharmaceutical companies creates an unequal system where regions are not well resourced to respond to crises. Regional manufacturing of medicines would allow countries and regions to develop production capacity, invest in skills and jobs in the sector, and create a long-term sustainable pharmaceutical system. Regional manufacturing can aid research and development in prioritizing work on neglected diseases. From 2000 to 2011, just 4% of newly approved products were for neglected diseases that affect middle and low income countries. Where the change happens, the WHO-led instrument on pandemic prevention, preparedness and response is an opportunity for the UK to show strong and collaborative leadership and respond to the lessons of the pandemic. Member states should collaborate and fund the research and development of medical countermeasures in such a manner that they are global public goods. This should include prioritising handover of expertise and manufacturing capacities to low and middle income countries. The new instrument should promote and incentivise a public health-based and open science innovation model. Member states should commit to establishing mechanisms to require sharing of IP and technology transfer. Countries should also commit to waiving all IP barriers to relevant medical countermeasures technologies and ensure the sharing of know-how, especially with respect to publicly funded innovations. Future financing instruments providing adequate and sustainable funding for the funding, equitable distribution and health service delivery of medical countermeasures, and the governance mechanism should be co-created by all member states and be inclusive of the civil society and transparent. Lessons should be learned from the failures of the existing international funds and initiatives like the Access to COVID-19 Tools Accelerator. There is much to be done. If we want to build a new pharmaceutical system that prioritizes essential medicines accessible to all, regardless of where they come from, we need to put much more pressure on our government and our international institutions to put money and democratic control into alternatives and away from the big pharma monopolies.
Thanks so much, Terry. Okay, our final speaker today. By the way, Hilda's been putting some really useful links in the chat, documents that were mentioned about ventilation and about organizing safe hybrid meetings. So that's really useful. So our last, we're running a bit ahead of time, by the way, so like everybody take your time. So our last speaker is Stephen Reicher, who is a member of the SAGE subcommittee advising on behavioral science. He's a professor of psychology at the University of St Andrews and a member of Independent SAGE. So we're really happy to have him here today. Stephen, over to you.
Hi, and again, thanks very much for inviting me. It's a real pleasure and a real privilege to be involved, and I've particularly enjoyed the speeches so far. They've said a lot of what I was going to say. I also, I think Joan is a wonderful example of you can't keep a good woman down even when she's in hospital. She's still at the meeting. I think it's self-evident we need COVID action, but in order to do so, we have to challenge two narratives which are becoming increasingly powerful and increasingly prevalent. And the first, as we've already heard, is the narrative that it's all over, which the government pursues in all sorts of ways, talking about us being in a post-pandemic period, something actually many others who should know better do as well, by suggesting that if you're infected, it doesn't really matter. Through their own actions, still the government website tells us to wear masks in crowded places. Do they wear masks in the House of Commons? And then in other measures, like cutting the amount of money they're going to use on promoting the booster in the autumn, which is going to inevitably lead to more infections and to more deaths. And I think there are at least 6 reasons why this narrative that it's all over just doesn't make sense. The first we've just heard, the narrative, even if it was to be relevant in the UK, and it isn't, is incredibly parochial, because you look at the rest of the world and it's self-evident it's not all over. You can go to the WHO map of vaccination, and it's a very telling map, because the rich parts of the world are coloured one way and the poor parts are coloured another way, because in Africa, most countries don't have 20% of people with 1 dose. Quite a few have less than 10%. In some countries, in Yemen, in war-torn Yemen, where, of course, we're involved in arming the Saudis, in war-torn Yemen, about 2.5% of people have 1 dose of the vaccine. So the notion that it's all over is ludicrous and ignores what's going on in the rest of the world. And of course, the primary issue are the deaths in the rest of the world. I think we should remember the statistic we were just given, that the WHO estimated that by the end of 2020, I love technology, that by the end of 2021 alone, had the WHO target of 40% of people been reached, and that was a low target, right? It would have saved 600,000 lives. I mean, let's just think about that as for a moment. When you scale it up, we're talking literally millions of people being killed. So when we talk about this being a genocide, that's not rhetoric, that's not being flowery, that's a simple fact. Millions of lives lost in the rest of the world. And if people don't find that, I don't know who could not find that a compelling argument. Remember also, the more that COVID circulates, the more chance it has to mutate, and therefore the more chance that we have new variants that will come back to this country to haunt us. Our lack of generosity, our genocidal ethnocentrism will come back to haunt us. So at a global level, it is self-evident that things are not all over. The second thing is that we seem to have forgotten about the vulnerable in our community. The many millions of people, 3, 4 million or more, depending on how you define it, who are permanently excluded from society, because with such high levels of COVID, they can't leave their homes. They can't take the risk. With people not wearing masks in crowded spaces, they can't take the risk. And we all know the old Gandhi quote about the mark of a civilization is how we treat our most vulnerable. Well, if that's the criterion we use, then we are in a pretty rotten society. So COVID is still incredibly significant for them. But of course, it's relevant more generally. With such high levels of infection, we still have ridiculously high levels of hospitalization. So in the summer, the early summer of 2020, 12,000 people were hospitalized with COVID. In 2021, the figure was 53,000. This year, it's 98,000 people hospitalized with COVID at this period in the summer. Well, I live in Scotland, so the summer is basically over, but still we have extremely high levels of COVID, which disrupt people's lives, but damage people's lives. So the second simple fact is it's not over here, given the levels not just of infection, but also of hospitalization and still of death. And the third point, again, these are points that have already been made, is the disruption to our society is quite massive. The disruption most obviously to the NHS, because of so many people coming in, so many staff off, the fact that you cannot discharge old people to care homes if they have COVID, the burden, the disruption to our society at every single level is massive. The fifth reason, obviously, is long COVID. We are storing up a disaster for the future. In particular, we're storing up a disaster for our children. When you look at the figures which show that this multi-system disease is affecting us physically in nearly all our organs, is affecting us mentally, is affecting us cognitively, we are storing up a huge problem. Infections do still matter. And as also has been made, the point has been made, it was made at the start, that we seem to be able, at least our media seem to be able, only to think of one thing at a time. So because we have Ukraine, COVID disappears. Because we have the energy crisis, Ukraine disappears, and so on and so forth. But all these things are interconnected. When people get ill this winter from being cold and being hungry, and as the new Marmot report shows, that inevitably will happen, people will die because of the crisis. And when people get ill, and many millions will get ill because of the crisis, and they try to get to healthcare, and they try to get to hospital, they won't be able to, because the NHS is under such burden in large part because of COVID. If you are sick with COVID, and yet you can't eat, you can't afford to heat your home, the experience becomes much more traumatic. All these things are interlinked. And so in all these ways, the narrative of it's all over is pernicious and dangerous and wrong. And there's one more thing. If you forget about COVID, if you say we draw a line under COVID and we do nothing, then you forget something which we talked about a lot a year or two ago, and that was build back better. That was the notion that at least something positive might have come out of COVID if we learn about the problems in our society and we address them. I sometimes say that COVID is like a barium meal, which shows the state of the body politic, and it's shown that it's pretty rotten. It's rotten in terms of inequalities of class and race and gender, in terms of who was damaged. It shows the rotten state of our infrastructure, how we've let the NHS atrophy. It shows the rotten nature of our housing, of crowded housing, of stuffy housing, of housing that isn't fit for purpose. And the argument was, well, we'll learn about that and we'll be forced to do something about it. And forgetting about COVID is a way of forgetting about the inequalities that became so stark during COVID, that we forget about the atrophy of our NHS. We forget about the problems of our housing stock. And so one reason why we need to be very clear that COVID is still here is that we need to do something not only about COVID, but to do something about the social ills which COVID has revealed. So it's all over is a narrative we must challenge. But the second narrative that we must challenge is a narrative that is becoming increasingly current, a rewriting of history, which suggests that any COVID measures are COVID restrictions. Any COVID restrictions are lockdown, and the real harm done to society was by lockdown, not by COVID. Well, let's remember back to 2020, when the rate of infection was doubling, virtually by the week. And the government's denialism led them to delay taking any measures at all. And in that fateful week of the 16th to 23rd of March 2020, where they dithered and they dallied for a week, the numbers of infections doubled and probably 30 to 50,000 extra people were killed as a consequence. It was doing nothing rather than doing something which killed people. And then let's also remember that many of us, that SAGE, that Independent SAGE, that WHO, that virtually every single body said, look, act early and act hard. Take measures to suppress infection, because if you don't, then infection will increase. And that's when you'll have to be draconian. That's when you'll have to have genuine lockdown. And we said, do the things we need to do. Ventilate schools so that they are safe. Make sure that people have the support so they can self-isolate. And that wasn't done by this government, which is why they did have to close schools again and why they did have to lock down again. It was the failure to take action which led to lockdown, not the actions which we proposed to drive down infection. We were always the anti-lockdown party, and the government's inaction is what caused lockdown. So again, lockdown wasn't the problem. But I think we also need to recognize that things have changed. They've changed since the vaccination. The things we need to do to be able to suppress, to drive down infection are less draconian as a consequence of the vaccine. We also need to recognize that wonderful though the vaccine is, although it saved so many lives, on its own, it's not enough. What we need now is a simple vaccine plus policy with simple measures which aren't about restriction. And they're not about lockdown. In fact, they're about giving more freedom to people. So that they are things like improving the nature of the built environment. So built environments are better ventilated. They have HEPA filters. They're more open to nature. The things that make actually our housing better for COVID, but also for our general well-being. Not many people realize the impact of, for instance, stuffiness, lack of ventilation on cognition, that decision-making declines rapidly when you get high levels of CO2 when places are stuffy. So we're talking about building back better in the sense of infection-resilient environments, but also just better environments for human beings to live in. We're talking about measures like making sure that people are able to stay at home when they are infected. I remember, I think it's one of the emblematic moments of the whole pandemic, that when Boris Johnson announced that they were getting rid of all measures, somebody asked him about, what about people staying home when they're sick? And he said, I wish that British workers were more like German workers, that we had a culture like German workers of staying home when sick. What he failed to mention, of course, is we have the worst sick pay in the OECD, where workers get a tiny proportion of their pay in sick pay, whereas in Germany, they get 100% of our sick pay. So if you want people to stay home, if you want to give them the freedom, the choice to stay home, you have to support them. So the measures we need are not measures of restriction. They're not lockdown. The Tories, whenever we say do something, cry, oh, you want lockdown. You want to take away freedom. No, the opposite is true. We want to have measures which increase people's choice. We want measures which give people freedom. And again, we need to intervene and change the narrative and make clear that we are not at the moment calling for lockdown, because thankfully with the vaccine, lockdown isn't needed. What we are calling is for a set of actions which give people the information and the choice to live safely. And let me finish with just one very specific form of action, which Janet mentioned and which we've been involved with through Independent SAGE, through Hazards, through bodies like the BMA, and through many trades unions which now support it. And that's the COVID Safety Pledge. That's a very simple idea. It's an idea that we get people and we get employers to commit themselves to, number one, taking COVID safety seriously, and specifically deal with the most egregious example of lack of COVID safety, which are the examples of people being forced back to work when they are infectious, something which is obviously bad for the workforce, but which is also bad for customers. And the idea of the COVID pledge is that it creates local coalitions between trade unions, workers who don't want to be exposed, and the TUC polling shows that about 10% of people have been forced back to work when they were infected, and about 10% of people have been forced to work alongside people who were infected. So clearly it's in the interests of the workforce, of the trade unions, but it's also in the interests of the public, of the customers, not to go into shops, not to go into services where there are people who are ill. And by using the COVID pledge and by making a visible sign in the window that COVID pledge is there, it creates leverage for consumers to begin to say, I'm not going to go there because I don't want to get sick. It creates the possibility of coalitions between the expert groups like the BMA and Independent Sage, who recognize the importance of these measures, the trades unions and the public. And with those coalitions, I think we are in a position to change the narrative and to make the point that we do need COVID action, because if we don't have COVID action, sure as hell, we're going to have COVID.
Thanks so much. That was brilliant. So we now have almost half an hour before this session is set to end. And I'll just recap about the workshops that we're going to be doing after the break so people can be deciding about that. So there's 3 different workshops. One is about workplaces and unions, one is about community action, and one is about taking action like out in public on the street, like trying to plan what kinds of things we could do. For context, we did a small protest action last week. We started at the COVID Memorial Wall. We had some really brilliant speeches from SOS NHS, from bereaved families, from the NEU, and then we marched over to Westminster, handing out FFP2 masks to the public to make the point that masks really should be free. Okay, so now basically, yeah, we've got time for questions, but also for just your own contributions. I'm sure we've got like a lot of knowledge and experience in this call, so if you would like to just chip in. For now, I won't like particularly try to time limit people, but I mean, yeah, I guess, you know, 3-4 minutes maximum, I guess. But okay, so and then what I'll do is I'll go back to the speakers probably in like 2 rounds, or we could just do specific questions being answered straight away if they're quite direct questions. Okay, Steve, would you like to go first?
Keep my contribution short because it's quite different from anything that's been said so far. I've been a member of the Scientists for Global Responsibility Group for a long time, and it's, as far as I can tell, no disrespect to Indie Sage, but well, absolute respect to Indie Sage. It's got a lot of scientists affiliated to it, and they are so politically inept. And it's only by the fact that a handful of scientists got themselves together to put together an independent point of view that gives the labour and trade union movement an alternative base on which to say we're getting, you know, we are being slaughtered. It occurred. I don't know what to do. I'm also a member of a number. It's going on longer than I intended. I contribute to a number of academic discussion groups. They're similarly. They're constantly organising conferences, but they're not addressing the underlying crisis. Where, as Steve just made the point, all these things are interrelated. And I'm beginning to wonder, couldn't we? I want just to, since we had a meeting with Janet on Friday, a radical scientist group or something like that. Because I'm not a professor. I have no institutional standing. I'm Secretary of London Hazard Centre, but that's about it. And so I don't think, I mean, I'd love to join the Indie Sage board or become part of its group. But advisors, or call them whatever you will, but we're not. The scientific point of view that we are all governed by the same universal laws of, you know, history and natural justice and all the rest of it. And the rich have said, well, we don't believe that. We're just going to carry on doing what we've always done and kill you if you don't like it. Now, how to resolve that, I have no better idea than, well, because I can complain about it, but that doesn't necessarily mean I know what to do about it. And all the best to everybody that's contributing. I'm going to have to leave. I'm not sure my wife's going to drag me away at some point. But I do look forward to a longer discussion about how to carry this, in particular amongst scientists, organising themselves separately from trade unionists, so we can organise a better pitch to trade unionists as to how better to do this. I was open, by the way, the Centre of Labour and Social Studies would have done that, but they've just wrapped themselves up. I just discovered last week. Wish you all the best to you. I don't know you, Chair, but I know Janet very well, and I know a lot of other people. But all the best to you. Take care.
Thanks. Stephen's just said he's got to leave at 4, so I'm going to change tack and direct questions for Stephen for the next 8 minutes. Would people like to raise their hands on that? I'll let Ian go quickly, but yeah, if people have questions for Steve.
Yeah, thanks, Teasy. Yeah, specifically, Steve, it's around. I work for Edinburgh City Council, and I've worked closely with hazards, both Scottish hazards and UK, for nearly 2.5 years now, in regards to ventilation and particularly in HEPA units. But the one real issue that all Scottish local authorities have had is the fundamentally flawed guidance that the Scottish Government has been releasing through their senior medical advisor, Jason Leach. Now, I say fundamentally flawed because I have been trying to get HEPA units installed within our workplaces for nearly 2.5 years. We've had depots open, we've had locality offices open, we've not got HEPA, we've got very few CO2 monitors in them. They said the priority was schools and early years, understandably. We have had breaches in COVID, and it is continuing. And only this week, there has been a report went to the senior management team, which I have responded to, saying that they are now going to withdraw all COVID reporting on our incident reporting system, apart from sections of the workforce that have to go in where there is the possibility of working with clients who are COVID positive, health and social care, in other words. Now that to me is absolute nonsense, because I have proof that there have been workforces, there's been workplaces in the last 2.5 years where there have been, for instance, we had a special school that had 14 cases in 1 week, and still the authorities in Scotland refused point blank to actually report it through a riddle to the Health and Safety Executive, who have been woefully incompetent all the way through the pandemic. And like all the speakers have said, I have a fear that we are going into this winter with a cost of living crisis, inflation going to be hitting the roof. That sadly, we've had 4 suicides this year in our workforce. And I'm at the moment working on a bespoke training programme with our HR. Now, I think that I can't prove it's work related, but in the way forward, with everything that's going on top of the pandemic, that is a major fear. So I'll leave it there because I know Steve's got to leave. Thanks.
Thanks. Gary, is that a question for Steve as well? I've just done ask to unmute. You should be able to unmute now.
Yeah, it's just the thing really that as Steve mentioned previously, the narratives of trying to get these points across. I mean, I've recently caught COVID and I was on holiday in Scotland, and people are just travelling on coaches, buses, whatever, and spreading COVID. It's just crazy. And also in in Scotland, you can't even get a PCR test. It's absolutely crackers. And you get insurance companies wanting confirmation of a PCR test, and you can't get one. And you end up arguing with insurance companies because you want to get back to England, back up. And fortunately, I was in a position that I could self-isolate at home for 14 days, which meant that I could get a COVID test that would say I'm negative, which it did. So I'm in that position. I was lucky enough to be in that position because a lot of people aren't, and they've literally having to go into work and give it to other people, or other people giving it to them. So how are we going to break this narrative down of convincing governments, etc., that we need to have these forms of mitigations in place? How on earth are we going to change the waves, as it were, now? Because the situation is now that basically COVID has been forgotten about and everyone's walking around without a mask on. So how are we going to do this? We're sort of going against the tide massively.
Okay, very aware of time now. I have a super quick question for Stephen, which is the COVID pledge is backed by a lot of unions now, but not very many employers have publicly put their name to it. I was wondering if, like, where is there a feeling that it's not, like, is it still kind of getting ready to go? Is it hitting barriers? What kind of response is it getting from target employers? Tracy, do you want to ask a super quick question?
Hi, no, I just wanted to come back on the point that Gary was making about how do we convince the government to...
In that case, do you mind if I come back to you just...
Yeah, that's fine.
Sorry. Okay, Stephen, over to you. Sorry for cramming all this in, sorry. Oh, sorry, you're still muted.
I should know about this by now, shouldn't I? So some really big questions there, and very good questions. I mean, I think, the issue of the role of scientists, the dividing line, and the thing which made us distinctive, I think, as independent SAGE, wasn't what we were saying scientifically. If you looked at what we were saying most of the time, we were saying exactly the same thing as SAGE and its subcommittees were saying, not surprisingly, because some of us were on those subcommittees. The issue was always, to what extent do you draw out the implications of that in terms of public policy? And Chris Whitty and Patrick Vallance took a rather conservative view with the small c that you didn't, and many other people felt that you didn't. David King, who set up Independent SAGE, was of the view that you should. And I suppose for me, it raises a larger issue. You see, if I can cite Gramsci, Gramsci talked about intellectuals. I think you can group scientists together as well. And he talked about organic intellectuals who were linked to the labor movement. And many of the most important academics in the 30s and later were actually part of the labor movement itself. They worked with, they used their knowledge for. Now, academics, scientists are regrouped in universities. They are funded by the state, and their research goes to inform the state. So it's not that they don't inform policy, but they do it through the state, and they do it and they answer the questions that are of interest to the state, and the knowledge they have is used by the state. And I think there's a really big question about how we as academics relate to our local communities, relate to trade unions, relate to community groups, how we use our knowledge with people, how our questions are set by those people. And I think that's a really important point moving forward, not only in terms of how our science is used, but also the issue of trust. I mean, one of the things that populism does, it sets up the notion of an elite, and reactionary populism then tries to say that even scientists are part of the elite, and the Tories have tried to do that. Remember Gove saying we've had enough of experts, and there's a real danger that we cease to be trusted, that things are just politically polarized, and to gain that trust, people have got to see us as part of their communities and working for their communities. So I think there is a massive issue there of massive importance about how we as scientists relate to different aspects of our society. And as long as we only relate to the state and state institutions, I think we have a problem. So I put that question on the agenda. The question about Scotland, the impression I get being involved in a number of Scottish Government committees is that on the whole, the talk is all right, but they don't have the funding, and therefore they're not going to do anything that costs funding. So, for instance, there are two groups that now exist in Scotland, which is better than in England, I think. One is there's a standing pandemic preparedness group, which has just put out a report that people can see. There is also an environment adaptations group. I'm involved in both, and that looks specifically at things like ventilation and more. And so, we are told we can make what arguments we want, but we are told also that the likelihood of those arguments to gain traction is an issue of finance. Now, I think the points that were made about, for instance, the need for CO2 monitors is really important. Let me just say again, if you look at cognitive performance, it declines by about 50% when you get to the same sort of ventilation CO2 levels that are dangerous in terms of infection. And it's always amazed me that we build buildings of learning which stop you learning. I mean, it's madness. And therefore, to put that on the agenda and to agitate for it and to basically make it a financial priority, I think is a matter of our campaigning to raise it up the agenda. I mean, that's what we exist for. So in many ways, the answer to your question is us and what we're going to do. And I think the same goes for how do we change government. Actually, my attitude has changed a little. Early on in the pandemic, I think there were ways in which, specifically as a scientist, we could give advice which would change what they do. Now, ideologically, they're not going to do anything. I mean, unless things get absolutely catastrophic, they're not going to do anything. And that's why we need to do things for ourselves. That's why we need to campaign as trade unions, as community groups, with local government, with scientific organizations, all together. That, for me, is precisely the logic of the COVID pledge. It's beginning to say, well, you're not going to do it for us, so we're going to do it for ourselves. We're going to use our leverage to put pressure on employers to sign up for the COVID pledge, because what we want to achieve is a situation where they will lose custom if they don't. If others, begin to say, well, we're going to make sure you're not infected, and people begin to go and shop there and spend their money there, that will create leverage. Okay. Now, in terms of the question of why not more have signed up, I think that's because actually to date, we've been developing the concept and we haven't started the public campaigning. And I think we do need to start the public campaigning. In fact, a number of people on this call are involved in that conversation, Janet and Tracy and others, and we would be delighted. I think I can speak for Tracy and Janet if we could join with you in thinking about how to have that local campaigning. For instance, just to use one example, if we could get one supermarket to sign up, that could then be used as a wedge to campaign and leaflet outside other supermarkets to say, why aren't you doing the same? And the other point I would make about that, I mean, I often say about my political campaigning, and I started my political campaigning in the 70s, is that all we've achieved is to make things get worse a bit more slowly, with one exception. And I think many of us lived through that exception, and that was the anti-apartheid movement, where, quite frankly, there was a victory. And the boycott campaign there was brilliant because it linked your local activity, whether you bought an Outspan orange or not, to the larger political issue about isolating South Africa on every single level. So that's sort of consumer campaigning and that sort of consumer action to force companies to take action which impacts on governments, which ultimately impacted on the South African regime, I think is a model that we can use. So we need to develop our campaigning. I hope we can develop that campaigning with you. And as a result, I hope we can get many more employers to sign up.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that was so great to have you. And yeah, Thank you. A great collaboration.
Thanks for inviting me. And as they say at the end of Casablanca, I hope this will be the beginning of a beautiful friendship. So.
Bye.
Okay, bye.
So it's now 10 minutes till the end of the session. So the thing I said about having time for lots of general comments, I guess no longer really applies. But I'm not going to insist on everything has to be a question. So Tracy, back to you, because I cut you off earlier.
Oh no, it's fine. I mean, I was just going to make the point that's been covered about, the government are not going to be convinced now, and we have to sort of do it for ourselves. But it was covered by Stephen eloquently.
Well, I think it is definitely an interesting thing to be considering, right? When we're thinking about, obviously part of the rename is COVID action. We take action. We want to force action, but obviously, it's not a strategy until you've decided, well, who's the target, what decision, and how do you make them do it? So I think it is an interesting thing to discuss, isn't it? About like, well, is the government kind of just too far gone, and would we actually have more success at making kind of change more at the grassroots kind of level, particularly in this moment when so much else is kind of up for contestation with the energy bills crisis.
I mean, I'll come in a wee bit there as well. For anyone who doesn't know me, I work for the PCS Union, Civil Servants Union. I'm the National Health and Safety Officer. And I think that, one of the main things I found during the pandemic was, first of all, before the pandemic, there was a sort of, let's just say, in many unions, a sort of certain attitude towards health and safety. Now, obviously, we were plunged into a unprecedented health and safety crisis. But also as well, all of our reps, whether they were experienced or whether they were new reps coming forward, each one of them were thrown into, were thrown at the forefront, really. And as Hilda said in the comments, have been instrumental in making workplaces safer. So my view is yes, the government are quite happy to continue to let the bodies build up. No, the government are not going to be convinced by any sort of reasoned argument. I mean, you can't even get a sensible, anything sensible out of them, out of their mouths. Never mind, that they're in deep crisis, aren't they? And how many prime ministers have we had over the past few years? But it's the fact that we've got an army of health and safety reps who have, gone through this massive experience, who have developed this, enhanced expertise, and the confidence has been built. I think that needs to be the main, priority on how we sort of build on that work and not sort of lose that. I think health and safety reps organising the workplace, around a collective agenda are going to, play a key role in.
I'm sorry, I'm awful today. I keep clicking things I don't mean to click, and I've just muted you, Tracy. Sorry, ask to unmute.
Technology. Yeah, that was all I was going to say. If there's a way to sort of, build, link everything up so that, we're developing programs around, supporting the work that safety reps do in the workplace, as well as sort of publicising successes, etc., etc. I'll leave it there.
Thanks. No more hands, but so I could ask speakers to start coming back on everything that has been said now. But are we sure we don't have anyone else want to chip in about anything? Martin.
Yes, thanks. I'm coming from the Netherlands, actually, but I know the UK situation quite well as well. I think one thing that we should at least put on the table, so if we say that the government is not going to change, I think that's true. But there seems to be a very high degree of irrationality on the part of the public as well. So any kind of strategy that really takes sort of conviction to be the aim, I think we would be very, very careful with that, because that might not be the way forward. We see in politics across the spectrum that we seem to have moved beyond the idea that you can convince people if you only have good arguments. It's much more about ideology, about upholding certain fantasies of normality. And I see in my own environment that the people I speak to and try to convince, they know what's going wrong. They understand my arguments, and they, in a sense, can accept my conclusions. Nonetheless, they won't change their lives, and they won't change their lives to protect other people, because, and I don't really know why this is. I think it's something like they think that what needs to be done is so big that you can't be doing it anyway. This has become too big. We've lost the fight, and so they've given up. So apart from just trying to convince people, I think we should think of strategies of dealing with that problem.
Hazel.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I'm just quite interested. I don't know if this is going to happen at all in the second half, although I can't stay for the whole time yet, about how and what arguments we used in terms of linking and joining with cost of living demands, because I think I feel that all the demands, and I appreciate what Tracy was saying about, how we, work with health and safety reps and the importance of the health and safety reps, work in our trade unions and so on, which I think we'll all want to carry on doing. But I think when we've got another massive crisis, and however that's responded to, whether it's the Don't Pay campaign or other campaigns, Enough is Enough, and all that, is how we link with that and what we do to keep the COVID issue, as Stephen and others have said, which is so central to all the other issues, how we keep that on the agenda. So it's just, I just wanted to put out a plea really for people to start thinking, and maybe there could be some concrete suggestions about how we could do that.
Yeah, I think for me, one thing I hadn't thought of was the point that Stephen was making about how actually the experience of having COVID while also that you don't have the money to support yourself. And it's not just that you can't self-isolate, it's that it will also just be a worse, like the illness factor will be worse, and then also the and also being cold for long periods also is like worse for your, very bad for your immune system. And okay, I'll bring in and then another thing is this idea of warm banks, where you would get loads of people to just go in a warm room together, presumably not well ventilated if the point is for it to be very warm. Great idea. Put all the vulnerable people in a badly ventilated. I think it will all really come to a head next time that infection rates go up at the same time as it's. Okay, I'll take Pat and then Steve. But if you could both keep it a bit brief, because then we still need to go back to the speakers as well. Thanks. Pat, go ahead.
I was just going to say, can you hear me? Yeah. I was just going to say that I think it's important that we are examples to the people that we meet and go around with, because I think that Martin made a very good point about this irrationality and people not changing their lives even to protect other people. So there is this drive amongst even people that you would consider progressive to go over to in-person meetings, even when it's an unsafe environment like somebody's front room, rather than organising online meetings, which would be just as easy and would mean that people could participate. And obviously, if somebody organises a meeting in their front room, I can't participate because I'm 75 and I'm vulnerable. And that's what one of the speakers was talking about earlier on. So just to link it up with the issue of taking up people's real problems at the moment, our Tenants and Residents Association on our estate hadn't met for more than 2 years because of COVID. And now we've decided to start meeting in the open air, in the square on our estate, so that people can participate. They can talk about their problems. The problems can be taken up and pressure put on for them to be solved and so on. But they're also not being put in a situation where they will be unsafe. And, I regard it as my responsibility as the chair of the Tenants and Residents Association to keep people safe. So I think that that should be that sort of thing, where we can take an initiative that keeps people safe and also gives them a voice. I think that's very important. And the other thing is, I think it's important that we should insist on our right to hybrid meetings. And, people should be able to participate in meetings, even if most people feel safe and want to go there in person. People who don't and can't should be able to participate. So that's what I mean by being an example, I suppose.
Thanks. Okay, so we've got Steve and then Joan and then Janet, and then we'll have a shorter break than planned. Sorry about that, everyone. Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for that. Just to reiterate the point, I think it's worth standing. It is worth making again. The general, I don't know how you're going to call it. You could call it the scientific critique of capitalism, or the scientific critique of liberalism, is the idea that we're not governed by the same laws of, well, you could call them laws of science, you can call them laws of history, you can call them whatever they are, but whatever laws and processes we're bound by, our lives are bound by, are the same as, only the same as the ones that bind all the other species on Earth. And it by the fact that, the universities keep gaining on the idea that, well, we know better than nature. And so the working class has always been misled. It's always been misled. And that was what Engels was trying to go on about. If you don't get this, if workers don't get themselves together throughout the world, you're going to get stuffed. On this picket line on Friday outside the post office, I said to them, look, you need to be reaching out to posters in Russia as well, because they're going through the same sort of treatment, and they're having their sort of national government as it struggles to maintain food and fuel security like our lot do. Except we don't generally go around invading other countries. I beg your pardon. I know that's opening a can of worms, but there are no military solutions. Anyway, thank you, Chair. Thank you. Sorry, I'll keep it short.
Sorry. Okay. Joan, then Janet quickly, then we'll have like a 5-minute break so that we can get back on schedule for the workshops section of the meeting.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'll pick up on all the points everybody made. But I do think it is really important that we do try and find the best ways of linking up with the cost of living crisis and the campaigns around that. The point was made about, Stephen made the point that the media can only deal with one thing at a time. Unfortunately, often left-wing campaigns can only deal with one thing at a time, and they'll leap onto the next one that comes along. And I think many people were quite upset. The very first very large meeting of Enough Enough in Clapham was very much a super spreader event in a packed hall. Some of them are getting a bit better about understanding the needs for hybrid meetings, but I've found in terms of campaigning for hybrid meetings, both within the Labour Party at a local level and also within Unite at a regional level, actually it's an incredibly important campaign because it makes you raise the issue and makes them acknowledge that the pandemic has not gone away and that there's a lot of people that they are totally neglecting. And I find it, I know we're going to have a breakout room on it, but I find it incredibly frustrated that the trade unions in particular, who we want to be arguing about health and safety in our workplaces, aren't providing health and safety in their own buildings and for their own activists. And I think that contradiction is one we have to keep talking about and arguing for hybrid meetings. I mean, we're getting results on it. It's not a one-way street, but I think, and there's a lot of more advice about technology that needs to be spread around, but it does raise the subject, and that's what we need to be doing all the time, is raising the subject, because people aren't doing it. I was also conscious when people were saying about the need to link in some of the big corporations, that I find it ironic that there were a number of heads of supermarkets, heads of energy firms who are really pissed off with this government. I mean, they're doing it out of their own self-interest, they're doing it out of their own profit motive. But I mean, people like the, whoever he is, the managing director of Iceland, has been on the radio several times demanding that action be taken and that people are given the money to buy the food that they want to sell. And therefore, to talk to them about linking it up, I don't think would be that contradictory. I think they may be quite receptive to it. And Hilda's mentioned about talking to Martin Lewis. I think that's a really good idea as well, that we actually say to these people, don't do it in isolation. You're going to be asking people to self-isolate in the cold and with no food. There at least was support with food the first time round in the first lockdown. It is actually going to be horrendous for an awful lot of people this winter. And I think it's going to be, and a lot of us will be casting around not knowing what to do about it, because it is not that easy to find all the things. I keep getting lots of ideas thrown at me because of working on a community centre, and most of them are just impractical. People want to do them. reinstating a lot of the mutual aid groups, that actually we could get food for people and things like that. But people are going to be in a dire state, and reminding them that that also applies to their health will be getting worse, because COVID, once it keeps going, you know, will spread, and everybody expects the next wave to be hitting thing. And the final point I want to say, I do think we should campaign for a little campaign, certainly in London on the Northern Line, pointing out that masks prevent colds and flu as well as COVID. It's known as the Northern Line lurgy, and I'm sure if Sadiq put posters up like that, people would wear far more masks than they do at the moment. Let's find ways of doing it that people can relate to and which are humorous.
Thanks. Okay, Janet. We've massively eaten into this break. Sorry.
Quickly, I just wanted to say that that one of the recent Hazards campaign Hazards magazines said no one is coming to save you, and that is absolutely right. We can't rely on anyone coming to save us. We can only do that ourselves, and that takes organising, like it always has done, by the way, in our workplaces. And it means people being in trade unions and people organising and supporting each other, and that's where we start from. And I would just say that it's absolutely essential that all our meetings are accessible to everybody, and they should be hybrid as a minimum, not just because of COVID, but because there are people with caring responsibilities that have never been able to get involved and get active because they were never accessible for them. You know, so if we're serious about lots of people being involved in campaigning, let's make them hybrid and let's give people choices. And I think the point that you talk about, you know, we've got these people that, you know, we can't ever convince that they're doing all, we shouldn't ever think that way. People will look at every campaign, every situation differently and separately, you know, depending on the way that they've been, you know, what's going on at the moment, you know, and we could say we've lost it. We could say we've lost the campaign on COVID safety. I don't think we have. I think in particular circumstances, in workplaces, in different situations, we will take people with us. So we look at every situation anew, and we look at how best we can maximise support. And who'd have thought we'd have had lots of black and ethnic minority, you know, all the Black Lives Matter stuff a few years ago. You know, that's phenomenal, that way that's all those young people have come together in reaction. You know, that was never organised by trade union movement or the labour movement. You know, this is a response to something that happened. And so let's take the, you know, let's respond to things that are happening, and it will happen in whatever situation. There's loads more I could say, but I'd like you to have a break.
Okay, thanks so much. So in theory, we were supposed to come back at 4:25. Should we come back at 1/2 would people like a slightly longer break? That's okay. So reconvene at 1/2, and at that point then but if people want to rejoin a bit earlier, then we can sort out allocating people into the breakout so that the actual workshops can start at 1/2. But yeah, we'll have 3 breakout rooms, workplaces, community, and street actions, so people can just decide which to go on. So yes, see you in the run up to 1/2. Don't leave the call, quicker not to, just turn off your video and mic for a minute. Okay, thanks so much, everyone.
Hey Janet, how are you keeping?
Oh, and feel free to
talk. Hi, Ariane, it's good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you.
That's
good.
How are you doing? I was up in Edinburgh a few weeks ago, actually, and I thought of you. Yeah.
Okay, there we go. All right, I will start, I guess. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so just a quick little recap of what we talked about. We had a pretty good conversation. One thing that seems pretty clear is that we need to be doing, it's important to make sure that other people in our unions and our workplaces know that we're out there. So people talked about, you know, starting groups. People suggested, you know, there's a few different motions and documents that were shared around and that are going to be shared with info@covidaction.uk, which is our email. Yeah, so then we'll be able to start making that as a template and share that about. We talked a lot about how, yeah, it's kind of a if you care about this stuff, it can often be pretty lonely, because the big push is kind of go back to normal. Everything's normal. It's all fine. And so I think really, you know, having things like this, it's very important to organize around them. and come together and talk about this stuff. We talked about focusing a lot of action around the COVID pledge as well. Starting groups, for each union, so people know how to communicate around one another. I took some notes. Am I missing anything? Make sure the unions, I guess. One other thing is, how do we talked about, like, how do we make sure that employees and coworkers know that, like, being forced to return to the office, there's like procedures around that. It needs to be risk assessments. The hazards campaign has done a really nice doc about this. How do we get people to know that this is actually something where they need to do risk assessments and make sure that people are safe? So a lot of work to do, but I think now that we all know that we're around, that'll be good.
Yeah, and I think we'll probably set to work quite quickly on trying to make those WhatsApp chats union by union. And also apparently, Steve was mentioning that there's already like a sort of national health and safety activists WhatsApp, so we could probably get in touch with that too. Andrew, are you reporting back for?
I was just saying, on a trade union, one of the things we talked about is the disability, working with disability groups within the unions to try and sort of bring in the access issue of, air quality is an access issue, which you mentioned about motions, but just to say, I think some sort of coordination around that might be helpful.
Great. And yeah, I'm going to put so Andrew was involved in a motion to Unison's Disabled Members Conference. I'm just putting that on the website. Andrew, maybe I should talk to you about whether I should put it up in exactly the form it's in, or whether I should kind of templateify it by just removing specific references to specific things in Unison. But we can message about that after. But yeah, some version of that will be up on the resources page of the site soon. Who would like to report back from the community workshop?
Yeah, shall I do that?
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we had we had a really good discussion about where everybody was coming from, and literally geographically, but also sort of with regard to COVID. And it was absolutely fascinating. And we tried to, unfortunately, we didn't have many people, we didn't have anybody living in the same area, so we kind of really spread out. So it won't be sort of our community, but we decided that we'd really like to take this forward, and somebody offered to set up a WhatsApp group in our group. Hence, you'll see all those names and numbers and email addresses in the chat. We talked about things like shops, like a big shop in our area, trying to get them on board, trying to do something about transport. There were 3 of us that were chairs of our tenant associations on our estates. So that was really interesting. And we thought we would try and do something jointly with our tenancy associations. People spoke about other links they've got, labour groups, SHA in various places, schools, even our hospital, our local hospital. We thought we might be able to try and get something achieved if we managed to find out, how to get the sort of the head of the hospital to do something to protect patients and workers alike. So all very kind of locally based, and we're going to take it forward by we needed another hour, I think, to actually get the ideas set in stone. Thanks, Tazy. Does anyone else want to mention anything?
Okay, cool. And then the street actions one.
Yeah, I'll do that, Tazy. Thanks. Yeah, there was 3 of us in our group, but we did have a good discussion, I think. And one of the things, the main things that come out of it really was that was using the COVID safety pledge as a basis and a way of promoting the COVID safety pledge on a street stall, either in a city or a town centre or somewhere where there's a good footfall, and or outside, a supermarket or a concert venue or sporting venue, anywhere where an awful lot of people are going to be and particularly if it's going to be indoors, and they're likely not going to not have proper protection from masks and filters and so on. So yeah, the getting people to take the COVID safety pledge away and promote that. Also leaflets as well. There is a leaflet, I think, still on our website, which can be printed off and put on the stall and so on. So things like that. What else? Yeah, I'm trying to think. Where are we? Yeah. And also getting out information, you know, letting people, because, you know, as several people said, we've got to do this for ourselves, haven't we? Nobody's going to come and rescue us, whether it's this or the cost of living or anything else. So it's getting out the information, and obviously we get the information out through Twitter and social media, but it's also good to get the information out if we can face to face with people, whether that's in a union meeting or on the street. And of course, on the street, it will be on the street. It will be literally face to face. So we talked about that as well. Possibly having somebody, you know, a medic or somebody there who could talk about the, you know, the sort of technical side of COVID and how it's not going away, etc., etc. And something else I'm going to say, I forgot what it was. Yeah, I think one of the things about street action as far as this campaign's concerned is that right at the beginning we did do something. I'm talking about the beginning of the pandemic, which is 2.5 years ago, whatever. And one of the problems we've had as a campaign is that we haven't had the numbers really. You know, other health campaigns that I'm involved with, like Defend Our NHS, KOMP, and so on. You know, we have got numbers, and we can get 6, 7, 8, maybe 10 or more people out on a street stall. You know, having said that, you know, 2 or 3 people can do a street stall, 2 people can do a street stall, pretty lonely on your own, but 2 or 3 could do a street stall, I would have thought, easy enough. So it'd be nice if we could have some way of doing that. And I know we are spread out quite a lot, and in some places there's just one person, you know, and that's all there is. And obviously that's a difficulty. But if there is any way we could, whether it's another WhatsApp group or what, I don't know, or practically, you know, joining people up and people getting together and say, okay, let's go and do a street stall, you know, or let's lobby, I don't know, a concert venue or whatever it happens to be, you know. And I mean, just, you know, and this also includes union stuff or labour movement stuff, doesn't it? You know, well, you know, TUC conference when it eventually happens or whatever. I went to Enough is Enough rally last week in Liverpool. It was fantastic, the rally, but there was 1,000 people inside a hall. You know, the only people wearing masks were people on our stall, which was a health campaign stall. You know, 990 people weren't wearing masks, you know. So God knows what that was in terms of a super spreader. You know, it's just horrendous, isn't it? So there's a lot to do in that sense, as we know. I'll leave it there. Okay, cheers.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. I think that's given us like, yeah, Marion, would you like to chip in quickly before I round up?
Oh, thanks. Sorry, I haven't heard everything because my connection's a bit iffy, but I heard people talking about getting information out. I wondered if anyone discussed actually kind of pooling resources and trying to provide masks and tests and stuff to people, because obviously you have to pay for them now, and that's a problem for people in the cost of living crisis particularly.
Yeah, we did that as a kind of symbolic thing on our last protest, just kind of literally handing them out as if they were like leaflets kind of thing, which got broadly a good reception. A lot of people who rejected it were like, oh no, I've got I don't think so.
Yeah.
That's something that Noah's been really interested in trying to maybe get off the ground.
Okay.
So if you guys want to, no, do you want to just? Yeah,
I was just going to say, I really, you know, one area where I think we could be very effective is in the US and in Canada. There are groups like this, put in the chat, Project N95, where they are distributing masks, and they're also providing information about like which masks are legit and not, right? So, you know, I think that's pretty key. I think you dropped your email in the thing, so I can ping you an email.
Yeah, cool. I mean, I've been doing a lot of that just informally in my social social networks really, because I've been lucky enough to be in a position to, but it would be cool to maybe, yeah, do something a bit bigger. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
So hopefully something can come of that. The other thing I would say in terms of sharing information is on our website, there's a tab that's called resources, which has mostly things that have been made by like other campaigns. So it's got sort of leaflets, it's got model motions, it's got how-tos, and if people have suggestions for things to add there, like I'm sure there's lots more that could be added. But yeah, like I mean, and that stuff is kind of more like stuff that activists could refer to then use. It's not like, you know, it's not like super public facing, but it's kind of something that is there to share the things that are being made. Okay, cool. Yeah, I think that this has generated like a lot of like practical ideas, and also kind of it has, I think, really made clear that like there are still ways to organize on COVID, and that it is absolutely related to all the other things that are going on in politics right now. And yeah, also like really great to like see new faces and stuff here, and also for all you people who have been showing up for every meeting since November of 2020. So I think this has been really, really energizing and encouraging. I think that, yeah, like I hope people are finding that it's not just the new name. I think that the new name has also just given us a reason to kind of look again at like what we are doing, how we can be effective, what the key messages are, the narratives that we're trying to bust. And yeah, so I just wanted to say thank you again to everyone for coming, and thank you especially to our amazing speakers, and to everyone for just bringing so much energy and ideas to it. And Ian's got to run off to another zero COVID thing right now for Edinburgh Zero COVID. If anyone else is in Edinburgh and has the energy like Ian does, go along to that too, because I think also local groups would be, we've always wanted to have local groups. I think building union networks is one thing, but like just shout out to the Scottish comrades for maintaining that local level organization, city level. It's really great. Okay, great. Have a good evening, everybody.
Bye.
See you soon.
Thanks, Stacey. Brilliant.
Well done.
Bye.
See you all again.
Bye. Thanks,
See you all
Stacey.
again.
Bye. Cheers. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks. That was great. Cheers. Thank you.
No worries. Bye.
Right, I'm going to take a picture of that.
Does anyone want to stay on the call and debrief at all?